Well, Shawn, welcome again to the Pipeliners podcast. So glad to have you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Same here, Russell, and I want to just start off thanking you for what you do by doing this. It helps the industry's culture because of the number of listeners you have and the topics we talk about. And it's not necessarily always prescriptive. It's more about how do we as an industry do the right thing? And so I want to thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate it. I've gotten a lot of great feedback. We're actually here at the API Pipeline Conference, and I've gotten a lot of feedback. I've had a lot of people carve me off and tell me about the podcast and how they've listened to it and how it's helped them out and learning the business. So, I love getting that feedback, and it's great to be out with people again.
Yeah, and like you, out of the blue, people have come up to me and say, "Hey, I heard you on Russell's podcast or the Pipeliners podcast," and I didn't realize which one. And it's just neat to see that people are listening and they're gaining something from it. That's the most important part.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is just a vehicle to communicate.
That's
with
right.
Folks. So we're here to talk about pipeline safety management again.
Good.
And the listeners probably ought to know that I've been drafting. I'm calling it my pipeline safety manifesto. And really what I'm doing is I'm doing some vision casting, and I'm trying to throw out a vision for the industry and then talk to people like yourself that have been working with this and get your feedback. So you've had an opportunity to read my manifesto. Mm-hmm. Am I crazy or what do you think? What was your takeaways?
No, I think you've got, you're exactly right. It's vision casting. Where do we go next? The beauty of SMS to me, it's not a static document. It's a document that outlines your process for you to become better and ultimately drive to zero. And I just think it's awesome that we're constantly trying to improve it. Right. And what your manifesto talks about is how do we have additional accountability as an industry to elevate our performance?
Right.
And not...
That's part of it. That's one of the key concepts.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is how do we learn from each other? And I think we make steps towards that, but we've got a long ways to go.
Well, we're certainly moving, and we're picking up velocity. Mm-hmm. And a couple of the key points I made is, one, I think we've got to do a better job about what I call structured data. Mm-hmm. The idea that we've got to capture this data about safety performance in a way that we can do analysis. And even more so than doing that within a company, we actually need to be able to do that across the entire industry. We need to know how is operator A doing versus operator B, not like a competition, but so that we can, we actually learn from that understanding why are we having differences. What are you doing different than us, and why are you getting a different result than us? That's so critically important on this journey that we're trying to undertake as an industry.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's a couple of things that resonates with me is that what happens to one of us happens to all of us.
Right.
And we hear that all the time, and I've experienced it firsthand. But the other thing is I think at times we need to take a step back and look at it from the public's perspective on pipelines. And they view us as one giant company.
Right.
On the performance. And if you think about when each of us within our company set our minds to achieving something within our company, we do that. Now, if we can elevate that to the industry level,
right,
and have the data and have the discussions and the learning and sharing, wow, I have no doubt this industry can achieve that drive to zero because we're resilient. We know how to do stuff, but we've got to learn how to aggregate it somewhat efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and there's going to be a lot of work and a lot of effort to understand what that looks like in the details, because there's a lot there that has to happen. One of the things that I did recently is I had a guy named John DeLue on the podcast. Mm-hmm. And John is a guy who's worked in aviation safety management for 30 years, and I wanted to understand the aviation industry's journey. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of themes that I think resonate with where we are. We're kind of where they were 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. Like we've embraced the idea we need to do safety management, but we're still learning, mm-hmm. right? We're still evolving and maturing, and we've got a long ways to go. One of the things that he talks about is this thing called the Aviation Safety Action Program, mm-hmm. which is a way for people throughout the aviation industry, and John was as a pilot, he's most familiar with what pilots do, but you can self-report, mm-hmm. and you can self-report without it being punitive, mm-hmm. And that's, I know some companies are doing that, but we're not doing that as an industry really. What do you think what do you think has to happen in order that we can actually start to get there as an industry?
You know, I've actually thought about that very question a lot, because I agree with you. I think that's an area where we can really help move the needle on safety. I think other industries have done that. The nuclear industry has done some of the similar type thing. And I think one of the things we got to do, sometimes we want to jump to the end solution and it'll be this great big program. I think we just got to take one step at a time. And we got to just start doing it. And pretty soon, I really believe, in knowing this industry for many, many years, is that it will gain momentum. People will see the benefits by sharing, and it's not, their fears don't come to realization. Too often we get paralyzed by the fears of my attorneys won't allow me, or you know what, I'll be misquoted, or the regulator is gonna find me. I haven't experienced that, and I can tell you, I've always tried to challenge our folks and myself, step out there, because what's the greater good? And the greater good is protecting the public. Yeah. And making sure that they're safe. And at times, yeah, maybe you get criticized a little bit, but in the end, I haven't experienced a negative consequence of what some of the fears have been.
That's interesting. So I wanted to ask you specifically about something that Marathon Pipeline did recently. You guys did a kind of a call out to anybody interested about a safety issue that you guys found, and you wanted to share it with the industry. Could you tell us about what you guys did there?
Yeah, so just in March here, we had a Geo Hazard happen to one of our pipelines, and it literally pulled our pipe apart. And it's, to me, one of the evolving newer threats in the industry that we've got to get our arms around. Just as we did 15 years ago on cracks and other stuff, you know, we came along and now we kind of know, but Geo Hazards is where we're at now, and it happened to us, and you know, NTSB launched on that incident for us, and typically, and all of us in the industry know, when NTSB launches and they're investigating your site there, it pretty well slows down your response, slows everything down, shuts all the communications down, and you know. But I really believe some of the learnings there that we learned needed to get out right away. And I talked with Rob Hall, who is the director over the NTSB for pipelines, and Alan Mayberry for PHMSA, and Tristan Brown. And I said, listen, this is something, if we go within a few weeks after this incident, I promise you that there'll be a great outcome here. Right. And I said, but if we wait a year, I said, we'll get an eighth of people wanting to learn from this. And so they agreed, and we worked with NTSB and PHMSA. We held it about 2.5 weeks after the incident, and we had over 900 people on an info share, operator to operator. But Russell, that's
unprecedented, though, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it was.
The industry's never done anything like that before.
Yeah, and at that level, for sure. And what's exciting about it, you know who was most excited about it, and they offered to do this, and I you know, really wanted them to do it, but Alan Mayberry of PHMSA and Rob Hall of NTSB wanted to do the introduction to the InfoShare. And so they did a nice introduction, and then they graciously stepped out of the InfoShare and allowed operators to have open and honest dialogue.
That is what we ought to be doing.
Yes.
That you know, that kind of thing actually makes the hair stand up on my neck a little bit, because that's where we need to be headed. That's what we need to be doing. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And you know what's gratifying to us, I mean, none of us, we've all can be in each other's shoes when you have an incident, and you feel bad not only for your company, but you feel bad for the industry, because we know we affect each other. But to me, it's also about how do we give back? How do we help say, hey, this happened to us, I don't want it to happen to you, but we got to step up and share and do that and push that envelope, because I can tell you, there were people who say this will never happen. You know, to do that share, you know, but now looking back at it, I think we can do more of that. And yeah, did we know all the answers at the time? Absolutely not. But we probably knew 90-95% of what happened.
Well, you know, the thing about it, the interesting, I think what you said is true, and I'm sitting here reflecting on why is it true. In that, you know, if we get the information out quickly, operator to operator, there's going to be a lot of interest. Yeah. But if we wait and we get the information out through an NTSB report, there's not a lot of interest. Oh, and you know, it's an interesting question. Well, why is that? I mean, culturally in our industry, why is it? I don't know that I have an answer for that, but it's just interesting to reflect on.
I think you're right. And one of the things and I had this discussion with NTSB and PHMSA wanting to do it, was there's a short window of learning in front of us. And if we can capture that window, you will maximize the potential. And what's even more awesome is that sometimes we want to say, well, PHMSA is going to work on a rule or advisory bulletin and all that stuff. Let us just start talking about it. And I know this industry, our resiliency and our innovation and our desire to do the right thing is impressive, but let us start talking about it. And that started the discussion, and now we're working on our RP for Geo Hazards. You know, PHMSA is going to be issuing an advisory bulletin, so there'll be a continuation of the discussion. That was just the beginning. The info share. Now it'll be a continuation. The other exciting part about that share, it was not just liquids, it was gas. Because Geo Hazards doesn't discriminate. You know, you know, it is going after the pipe, not necessarily what's in the pipe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's to me that whole conversation's fascinating. And I think you guys are to be commended with what you did there. And you're doing two things. One, you're setting a precedent. But even more so than setting a precedent, what you're doing is you're making it okay for others to say, hey, you know what, we're going to do the same thing. If we have something happen, we're going to get the information out. Now, the thing about a geohazard that's different than some of the other safety is the human element, right?
Yeah, right.
And it's we all know that if we go and we look at safety and we look at incidents, that most of them involve some kind of human factor failure. Yeah. And I don't mean human failure, I mean human factor failure. That's a training or process or procedure or something that in our systems are doing wrong. Getting that information out is tougher.
I fully agree with you there. But I will say this, I think if you focus on sharing the facts, what is deliberate, not an interpretation, that'll happen, later down the road, but sharing the facts, here's the circumstances around it, that will allow operators enough to start looking, hey, how could I prevent that within my system? And I agree with you, because there is liability, and plus, you don't know everything right after an incident. But if you share the facts, and that's what we try to stay with, and that was my discussions with NTSB, is, hey, well, I'm just trying to share the facts, and they were so supportive. Rob Hall and Alan Mayberry, I commend them, their leadership. A funny quote I'll tell you, Alan afterwards, he said, this is fantastic. He said, I've been wanting to do this for years. And it's just exciting to see that, because we're all in this together.
Right.
It's not them against us. We're in this together, because, when we have big incidents, it's hard for them, right? It's hard for the public, it's hard for us. So how can we help each other? And that was a great example, and I commend them for their leadership for doing that.
Well, and it also is an illustration that there really are opportunities to collaborate with the agencies.
Yes.
And that there is an interest in the agencies and the agency leadership to collaborate with industry.
Yes.
And that's how we solve problems. We got to work together. We got to pull the train together.
Yeah, the collaboration just doesn't happen through rules and regulations. No. The collaboration happens through discussions in crisis moments, intense moments, but also, conferences like the API conference here. Alan Mayberry, Linda Doherty, you're here, others are here, and we're talking about how we can become better. And that's what this is about. Right.
So I want to shift the conversation a little bit, because the other thing I'm laying out in my manifesto, and I'm if you guys see me on the camera, I'm looking to the left here a little bit, because I'm trying to cover some points. But one of the other things I think that's really important is the systems that we got to get in place, right? And the nature of pipelining, one of the other parallels between aviation and pipelining is there's a lot of very technical, very vertical disciplines. And I think in the pipeline world, we're seeing safety improvements in the vertical disciplines long before we're seeing improvements in those things that cut across multiple disciplines. So kind of a tee up, what do you think is required of us to get systems in place that are going to support safety management across disciplines?
Well, you probably have heard some discussions within our own company, is that I think we do we call it our silos, right?
Right.
We're our silos, and hey, you're focused on integrity, and there's a concept that we started a couple years ago, I started saying, is that we all share this risk. So when it comes to integrity management, it's just not your integrity department. It is your damage prevention group. It is your folks engaging with the landowners. It's a shared risk.
Control room.
Yes.
It's the entire
that's right.
corporate operating system.
And
even your business development affects integrity management.
Absolutely. So what's the goal of integrity management? Zero incidents, right? So we are trying to mitigate so we can achieve that collectively. And too often we said, well, we'll turn it over to the integrity department because that's where it fits nice. And we're still on that journey for sure, but we're opening up and what I will call empowering our leaders to step out of their lane. So you ever see the Geico commercial and the tattoo artist is saying, hey, this doesn't look right, and the tattoo guy looks at the guy he's putting the tattoo on and says, hey, stay in your lane, bro. and our phrase is, hey, get out of your lane.
Get out of your lane.
Get out of your lane and challenge the integrity department. Well, why is this? And challenge the damage prevention because collectively we'll help each other.
Well, I agree with that. I think in practice it's challenging because of workload issues.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And focus, right? It's one thing to be, one of the things that's very interesting about the pipeline business, it's so very technical, it's impossible to know all the technical domains in depth. So we have these experts that have that technical depth that we call on and utilize, right? But that's a very different kind of skill set than those folks that are looking across the organization. Mm-hmm. So, my MBA was quantitative, and there was a lot of total quality management and Deming and all that kind of stuff when I studied all that. And in the manufacturing world, you can break that down.
That's right.
And the big culture shift they had to make is they had to start taking and have people looking at the system, not just people looking at the process.
That's right.
And I don't know, do we have people in our industry that are really kind of the subject matter expert in the system? Or is that a gap we need to plug or a capability we need to build?
So I would answer it this way, and I agree with you. Processes are too close to the action at times. We need the processes, but the system, and I would say the system is SMS. Safety management system, and we're teaching people what's that look like, and that's evolving. I see it across companies. They're trying to focus on how do we evaluate our processes and the effectiveness, and challenging our process leaders. Right. And here's what's happening. We're seeing this in our company. There is an inherent bias when you ask someone that's in charge of a process, Russell, do you got everything? You're good? Oh yeah, I got everything. I talked to everyone and all that. And then you go out and you talk to employees and you say, hey, any feedback on anything? And they say, Russell's process really doesn't do that. And you go back to you and you say, well, I didn't know that. And it's that type of vicious cycle. And
that's a communications issue. And it's also a systems issue.
Yeah.
We call that in our world, in our business, we call that stakeholder engagement. And stakeholder engagement is getting the information back and then processing it and sending back the results of the processing. Mm-hmm. That's stakeholder engagement. The other thing, there's a lot of conversation or confusion, if you will, about policy, procedure, process. What do these terms mean?
Yep.
And one of the things that's kind of been an aha moment for me, and I've learned this from Sheila Howard and Gary White, is process is not work. Process is not task. Process is everything governing the effectiveness of the work or the task. Mm-hmm. So, task is, I've got to go do this dig. I got to go do this dig, and there's all the things around the dig. Process is asking a whole bunch of questions about that. Did we plan the work? Mm-hmm. Did we execute the work as planned? Mm-hmm. Did we query the people that did the work? Did they do a job task? Did they do a job hazard review? Did they follow the procedures? Do they say they follow the procedures? Do they say they understand the procedures? They say they had the right equipment. Do they have the right tools? Did they have the right training? Did they have the right leadership, the right supervision? All this kind of stuff. And that data needs to be systematically gathered. Because it's only by gathering that data and doing the analysis we're going to get to the learning we need to actually build the systems. You and I have talked before, and we always talk about it. It really matters at the boots on the ground, but it's really the system around what's supporting those guys with the boots on the ground.
Yeah, and I think what you're leading to is how do you get and sort the data? How do you analyze the data? And so it's bite-sized chunks. and it's chunks where, hey, so when we talk about shared risk, it's all the way from that technician to that engineer, and what the technician needs is different than what the engineers, but it's all the same data. And you can't just send the overall file. You got to have a system that breaks it down.
It's not the same context.
I fully agree with that.
Same information.
Yeah.
Information being what we distill out of the data to use for decision making, right? So that to my point, being clear about what data we need to capture and how we need to capture it requires a great deal of subject matter expert engagement. And it's in I got these results and you got these results and we came to different conclusions. Isn't that interesting? How did that happen?
Yeah.
Right? That we actually start to refine. And I don't think we're there at that level yet. We're working to get there.
I go back to, even with data, there's an inherent bias. How do I have the data to show what shows all the positives we're doing? You look, because
it's like what my dad used to tell us, Russell, figures never lie, but liars figure.
Yeah, and I think people do it because they want to show they're making a difference, but yet there's an inherent bias, and we need to develop, how do we get that inherent bias out? Because that inherent bias can lead us down the wrong and not have us as effective as we can be.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I think some of it comes down to culture and making sure people understand what's your real objective. I'll give you an example of, we had a depth of cover issue. A farmer hit our line, and our line it should have been deeper. It should have been deeper. And so we went through and we developed, how much are we going to lower our lines? And we said, hey, we'll go, let's say 18 inches or 24 inches. And that became, that's the goal. And I said, no, that's not the goal. The goal is to make sure a farmer never hits our line. If he's got a piece of equipment that goes 36 inches, we got to get it out. So
there is so much bound up in that simple little conversation because we confuse specification of work with objective of the process.
You got it.
Right? And they're not the same thing.
You got it.
They're very closely related, but they are not the same thing.
And I would argue that the implementers of those processes need to understand the specifications, but they also need to understand the objective.
Yes.
Because with culture, if they clearly understand the why and the objectives, they'll get you there.
Yeah, that's actually... Okay, I've got to revise my manifesto now because this is an extremely good point. If you think about the U.S. military, and one of the reasons it's so effective is that everybody understands the work they got to do, but they also understand the objective.
Yes,
and they understand the constraints and limitations around achieving the objective.
Yes,
and they understand what they need and what they have available to them. And it's out of full understanding that people's creativity comes up with a solution that nobody anticipated.
And I would say they're empowered to get to the objective.
That's right.
You're empowered to get to the objective.
Your job is the objective.
Yes.
Here's how we think you should accomplish it, but if that doesn't work, your job is to get to the objective.
Amen. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Again, there's a lot bound up in that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, did you have any other comments to me about the document I shared with you? Anything else that leaped out? Anything where you think, like Russell, you're off of the rails there? The train's not on the tracks?
No, I really liked some of your thoughts about culture. I like some of the thoughts of really about I'll say somewhat of an industry accountability, to do this and to share. And how do we do this? Because, it comes down to risk management. It comes down to, hey, am I comfortable with sharing? Yeah, probably on a lot of stuff, but another company may not be. And it may be on the situation too, but how do we get it so it's a safe environment?
Right.
Because we're trying to achieve safety, right?
Right.
We got to create the safe environment, and that's something we have to evolve. The other thing I really liked about the document is you're taking the time to take us to the next level. And that is so important. SMS was designed not to be, as I said before, static or just, hey, yep, check.
Yeah,
it's constant.
It's a process.
It's a process.
It's a capability. It's an industry capability and competency.
And like you, I'm plugged into NTSB and a lot of the airline industry, and I've talked to them, and I can tell you what, after the Boeing incidents, right before the pandemic, the 737 MAX, the tragedies they had there, several of the leaders said we failed because we lost track of SMS. They lost track of it.
Right.
And we need to make sure as a pipeline industry, we don't lose track of it. We've had great results so far. Our release has gone down. Yeah.
Success breeds complacency.
Yes. And we need to keep challenging ourselves and make sure SMS is as exciting as it was when it was rolled out.
Yeah. And there's a lot that we have to do to get, one of the things that we have to get to, and I think that we're getting there probably quicker than we realize, is that everybody has to realize they have the authority to shut down a pipeline operation if they believe it to be unsafe.
And sometimes I think we think that's just the controller.
Right.
It could be the integrity engineer. It could be the analyst saying, hey, I don't like this spreadsheet. Here, you get it to, the control room and say, we got to shut it down.
Yeah.
And so it's not just the person pushing the buttons. It's the people making all the support decisions, the SME, to get us so we can operate safely.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this has been awesome. You have anything else you want to add about this conversation, or is this good enough to call it good for today?
No, I want to applaud you, and I just encourage. This is a great industry, and your podcast has helped fill a void there, but we need to keep socializing. How do we do more?
Yeah.
And in the sharing, and I will say this about the sharing. One of the things that was really special to me is when we had that incident in Edwardsville just last month, I received numerous phone calls, and people say, how can I help? Mm-hmm. And it just shows how close our industry is. And I told them, I said, hey, I think we're good here, but the real answer is this: when you have something that happens that you share, and you share timely.
Right.
Don't wait for a year. Don't wait for go and work with our associations, AOPL, API. They will help you do it, and it is so valuable. The team that did the share, they've had countless people come up to and say, hey, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and I will say that you're really fostering a culture of sharing in Marathon. I had some guys reach out to me very early on in the podcast. Mm-hmm. You know who I'm talking about. I call them the three Amigos. And they came on and did a whole series of podcasts, and I still get comments about that. And we talked about a lot of really technical kind of in-the-weeds stuff, but it was just really awesome. So I appreciate, it's so hard for somebody who's doing something like this, because there's so much concern about the wrong message is going to get out to the wrong people. But I really appreciate not just yourself, but your whole team and your willingness to just say, hey, look, here's what we're learning and that we think other people ought to know.
Absolutely. And to me, that centers around, I think we're called to be humble and have humility, but also we're called to be transparent.
Yes.
And when you do those two things, good things happen.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on. We got to do it again.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Russell.